So you can see when you break down the data, the mayor hasn't been transparent. In fact, he's possibly broken quite a few rules along the way. And this is nothing really to do with air quality. This is all to do with money.
This is Callum Smiles for Rebel News, and as opposition towards Sadiq Khan's radical ultra-low emission zone expansions grow, I managed to speak to Orthodox Conservatives director Josie Robertson, who explains why not only should the expansion plans be scrapped, but the entire ULEZ should be dissolved altogether. So I'm here just outside of the Houses of Parliament to speak to Josie Robertson, the director of the Orthodox Conservatives. Joseph, thank you for your time. Tell me what your take is on the ultra-low emission zone.
Sure, well, thanks for having me. I think the first thing to note is that as far as most people are concerned in London, this is nothing to do with air quality, and whichever side of the debate you're on in terms of whether or not the city is too polluted, this is a tax that's going to come down on the poorest in the city rather than the richest. It's not going to do anything for air quality, as we've seen from the mayor's own commissioned report, which unfortunately backfired and showed that it was going to do very little, if anything at all, for air quality. This is more to do with a cash grab, as far as the people of London are concerned. This is to do with the mayor realising that through failed policy, through his time and tenure, that he needs to change things and actually start to make more profit. And he's using the poorest in society to do that.
And how much is he expecting to raise through these policies?
Well, I mean, it's estimated that it's going to cost an average car owner who's unable to afford a new car that actually meets the regulation to not have to pay the ULEZ fee. It'll probably cost them about £4,500 a year. So you're looking at an extra few million in profit per year. And of course, that's going straight into the coffers of City Hall, probably not to be used for anything very constructive. And most people aren't very happy about that.
And how far are the expansions looking to go? Because we already have the ULEZ here in London, which many people think this is something that's being implemented rather than extended. Yeah. How far is it looking to go?
Yeah, well, of course, it was Boris Johnson who originally introduced the ULEZ zone, so not all the blame lies at Mayor Khan's door in terms of that policy as a whole, but this is an extension that isn't just about the city centre. The original purpose was to, prevent traffic build-up, to try and do away with some of the congestion in the city centre, and it had, a kind of logic behind it. This is more about extending to, town and country boroughs, to places outside of London now, which don't have access to public transport. So we're looking at people who rely on cars for their everyday jobs, the school run, or perhaps, they might be involved in farming. That's how far it's extending. We're looking at agricultural communities that are affected by this, or just people who have to drive to access the nearest train station before they can get into central London. And these people are going to be having to pay, £12.50 to get off their doorstep unless they want to upgrade to a new car, which most of them can't afford. So this isn't just about the city. This is about the wider area. This is not about London. This is about places like Romford, like Orpington, who are on the periphery of London. They're not London-centric towns, but of course people commute in, and they're going to be badly affected by this.
So talk to me about Hounslow, because it's quite a comical situation they found themselves in, because quite often with public policy we see hypocrisy is everywhere, but they've really taken it to another level. What can you tell me about them?
Yeah, well, Hounslow is quite a woke council, what I call environmental wokery, and they've been busy pushing for the idea of the ULEZ expansion for quite some time. They were one of the keenest to have cameras installed to catch, all the thieves of green energy riding their vehicles through the council area. But then they asked for their own fleet of cars to be exempt from the policy, which is quite an interesting take for someone who is so heavily involved in preaching about it. But again, it's one rule for them and one rule for us, as we'd expect from these Labour councils. And in this case, I think it shows how much they actually think this is about environment and air quality and how much they actually think it's about lining their own pockets. Yeah. Then they turned around and said, but not for us. We don't want our councillors, paying the emission tax on certain vehicles, and we don't want it too heavily mandated in certain areas. But they were all for introducing cameras and that kind of thing. In other councils, there's been a bit more of what I would call a sensible pushback. Where it hasn't come from the council, it's often come from locals. People have been, putting black bin bags on the cameras that are being installed and doing what the good people of London do, which is to be pretty common sense about all of it. But yeah, Harrows is a particular example where we see what I call environmental wokery at play. Because they want to score brownie points, we're environmentally clean, but they don't want to foot the bill. Yeah.
And do you think this actually has anything to do with cleaner air? Because the last time I checked, just by paying more money, it doesn't have any impact on how clean air is. Some people have talked about they actually think this is more about social control. What's your take on it?
Well, I'd agree with you there. I mean, we've Orthodox Conservatives, we've just produced a report on net zero as a wider sort of policy set, and looking at some of the policies that have been implemented for that. And one thing that is, eminently clear from that is that no matter how much you spend, you can't actually control how much you're reducing your emissions enough to see any notable difference in change in temperature, even if you agreed that there was man-made global warming. And I mean, that's contentious in and of itself. To actually reduce that would take trillions and trillions of dollars, which is not feasible. Nobody has that kind of money. So when you look at you look at some of these smaller policies, like for instance ULEZ, other things like that, what you tend to see is that there's no scientific basis for what they're doing. And as I mentioned earlier, in the mayor's own report that he commissioned, there was absolutely nothing to say that it was going to help air quality or reduce pollution. And it was more just obviously a cash grab. I mean, if he had genuinely been doing this to try and make London a better place, he would have looked at that report and said, well, I'm going to hurt the people that I'm supposedly representing, and this isn't going to do anything for air quality, and so I'm going to back down. But he didn't do that. He went harder. He tried to cover up his tracks, and in fact, he tried to also overturn about, I think it was 6,000 sort of. There was a commissioned public discourse where people were meant to sort of send in their queries and their opposition to this. He ignored 5,000 to 6,000 of these notes from a group called Fair Fuel, who campaign on fuel and car issues, but at the same time allowed about 5,000 or 6,000 count from climate restriction lobbies and groups. So you can see when you break down the data, the mayor hasn't been transparent. In fact, he's possibly broken quite a few rules along the way. And this is nothing really to do with air quality. This is all to do with money. Yeah.
And, in the last mayoral election, was this ever mentioned?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't in his manifesto, which is one of the biggest and most contentious issues. This expansion is something that's come as a result of his failed policies. It's purely the mayor sort of realising that he doesn't have enough money in the coffers, and instead of taking the blame and looking to maybe expand and do more advertising on the tube, or do some proper marketing like perhaps somebody with a bit of business now, or possibly a capitalist mentality might try and do, he's decided to tax people, and he's trying to do this by unfortunately hiking up something that's going to affect the poorest in society. I mean, he's just a very, very bad socialist as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
And finally, as you speak from the conservative side of politics, business is a big thing when it comes to conservatism. How is this going to affect smaller businesses?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think that's even taken into account, particularly when you look at the expansion of 15-minute cities, and this idea that we have now that we have to constrict city centres and even urban areas that are on the periphery of city centres. We're seeing it happen in Paris, we're seeing it happen in London, we're now seeing extensions of these 15-minute cities in places as small as Oxford, Bristol, Birmingham, the list goes on. And one of the issues with the ULEZ expansion that kind of ties into that 15-minute city way of thinking, which ignores small businesses and their logistical nightmares that already exist, is to do with the fact that they're not taken into consideration. They're almost secondary when you look at town planning nowadays. This is part of an agenda to, in my opinion, to shut down small business and to shut down a society that relies on its business owners as its backbone. And this is far bigger. It sets precedent. This is the other thing that ULEZ does specifically. It sets precedent for other cities in the UK. This will not stop in London. This will continue into Oxford, Bristol, Birmingham, Glasgow, and many other places. And the problem is, it's part of an agenda that doesn't consider, at best, doesn't consider small business owners, and at worst tries to actively eradicate them. Yeah.
Well, Joseph, thank you very much for your time. All the best.
Thanks very much.
So while Sadiq Khan is going to try and forcibly take £12.50 from private vehicle owners, here at Rebel News, we only ask that you can spare whatever little you can so we can continue to bring you the truth and, more importantly, the news that matters to you. And you can do so and follow all of our other British content at ukreporters.co.uk. Thank you.